Welcome back to my Football as a Pie series, and this is episode 7. And what you're going to get in episode 7 are all the randoms that happen in football. So before I get into this video, I want to tell you a couple of things because I don't think I've mentioned this enough. First and foremost, everything I'm going to say in all of these episodes can work for college football and NFL football. So both football, right? Football is football. The other thing I want to say here is this is my third or fourth time trying to record this video. So many things have gone wrong. You would not even believe how many things have gone wrong, but that is where we're at. Also, if you have not already watched the previous 6 episodes that come before this one, please take the time to do that. I will put up some cool graphics somewhere that will show you all the other videos that I have in this series. However, if you are here for the randoms and you have been waiting for this video to drop, welcome. You're in the right place. We're going to talk about all the random things that you see in a football game that can impact a football game, because one of the things I'm building in this football pie is I am trying to give you a lot of just different areas where you can look at football and you can go, okay, if my team does this, then what does that mean? If my team does this, what does that mean? My goal is to help people assess their football teams, figure out if their football teams are going to win, figure out the areas where their football teams need to get better, and honestly, overall, just be honest with yourself about what you're seeing and also trusting yourself about what you're seeing, because if you don't trust yourself, it makes this very hard. However, I will stop rambling here. Before I get into this video, again, if you haven't already, take some time, go watch the other videos to make sure that you know what's going on here. Or if you're new here and you're trying to figure if you like this whole thing, stay here, watch this video, and then go back in and watch all the other videos. Anyways, without further ado, let me get into all of my randoms or randomness that happen in football that sometimes, you know, it just happens. What can you do? It's football. The one thing about these randoms that I would say is to make sure that you are tracking them on your team. Now, some of us are fortunate enough to not have these things pop up more often than others. But if you are, again, new to football and you're learning a couple of things, I think these randoms will be easy for you to map out and see if they're happening, because you will be able to recognize them when you see them. The other thing I'll say before I get into these randoms is also, this is all about trusting yourself of what you're feeling, trusting yourself in what you're seeing. We all watch games, we all watch sports, and we all get that feeling in our gut some point or another that lets us know something is either off, something's going on, something doesn't feel right about this team, and we can't really put our finger on it. These are kind of the things that you can't really put your finger on, but you see them happening. So I wanted to add them to my football pie because they are an important piece of my football pie. So let me just get into these things so we can talk about them. The first one is going to be you can't put games away, or, you know, a better way to say this maybe would be like you look like you're trying to lose. During this season, there were multiple times in all 3 of my teams that I said, I don't even know if my team is trying to win this game. Or when I watched this game and my reaction videos, I was like, it looked like Texas was trying to blow that game. Or it looked like Colorado wasn't sure if they wanted to win that game. Or God forbid, my Steelers sometimes, I don't know what they were doing. So there's moments in football games where you will be watching and you will say, why can't my team put this team away? Why does it look like we're giving this game away? Why does it look like we're not doing everything we need to do to make sure that we win this football game? This is a random thing that you need to pay attention to. If you're ever sitting at home and you're watching your team play and you start to kind of question the motivation of your team, or you start to question some of the things that your team is doing, a lot of that happens because it fits in this section, and that is what you need to pay attention to. Your team cannot put games away, and it looks like you're trying to lose. There might be a better way to put this, but we all know this feeling. I had it throughout the season, so I know that you know what I'm talking about if you will pay attention to your team and be honest about what you're seeing them do. The next part of this, and honestly, this frustrates me probably as much as turnovers, is poor clock management. You can't manage the clock, bad clock management. It is probably the one thing that I will sit on my couch and I will actually yell at the TV. And I will say, why are we running the ball? Why are we throwing the ball? Why are we not kneeling the ball? Why are we hiking the ball so fast? I watched this happen in all of my teams this year. Manage that clock. Also, Steve Sarkisian. I can't. There are so many moments this year where I was like, Coach Sark, what are we doing? What are we doing? All coaches and all coaching staffs have this thing where I don't know what goes wrong. I don't know what happens, but these games get tight and they forget that they need to manage the clock. I want to say here also, one thing to mention, it is not just about managing the clock at the end of the game. It is also about managing the clock during the game. For example, if it's in the third quarter and you're up by 17, you don't have to hike the ball at 17 seconds. If you're up and your advantage is you're winning in the clock management game, or you're able to control the clock through what you're doing, you don't have to hike that football. But what I see a lot of times, these coaches, it will be in the third quarter and they're not managing the clock well, or it'll be at the beginning of the fourth quarter and they're not managing the clock well. So although we pay attention more to clock management when it comes to like the 2-minute warning or the 2 minutes before the game is over, that does not mean throughout the game you're not supposed to be managing the clock. So one thing to consider when you're watching your football team, do you trust your coach's ability to manage the clock? What have they shown you? Have they shown you their ability to manage the clock? I can go in right now on Coach Sark. I can go in right now on Coach Tomlin, and I can go in right now on Coach Prime. I'm not going to, but something to consider when you're watching your football team.
Can I just go on a little rant here about the randoms? Because here's the thing. The clock management thing really bothers me. I cannot tell you how many times I yell at the TV screen and I'm telling my coach, stop throwing the ball, stop throwing the ball, stop throwing the ball, run the ball. I don't understand why these coaches do not just do what it takes to win games. I don't care what it looks like. I don't care if you run the ball 45,000 times. For some reason, these coaches get happy, or they want to win pretty, or they want to institute the best plays and the best this and the best that. I don't care about any of those plays. I want to do things that work. So if running the ball down the other team's throat works, you run the ball down the other team's throat. I will get off the soapbox, but I need to vent a little bit because this clock management thing really pisses me off, especially when these coaches come up and they throw the football. Why are we throwing the football if we don't have to throw the football? Run the football, run the clock, win the game. It is that simple. I will get off the soapbox, but I had to say this here.
The other thing is actually something that I've noticed my Steelers do, and when I realized my Steelers offense just wasn't very good, is you kick field goals instead of scoring touchdowns. And this is a big deal when you're assessing your team, because if you notice that your team gets to the red zone and they often have to settle for field goals and they're not able to score touchdowns, that might be okay for the game that they're in. But if you notice that pattern, if you notice that trend, that is something that you need to stop and take note of. If your team cannot get the ball in the end zone, that is an issue. When I realized that Pittsburgh Steelers could not get the ball in the end zone in the 2024 season, that is when I realized we had a problem. Also, my Texas Longhorns, Coach Sark struggles in the red zone. For God, help him. Just help him, okay? Please help him. By the way, hook him. I don't think I've said that in this video. Knowing that Coach Sark struggles in the red zone, I notice when my team is kicking field goals as opposed to scoring touchdowns. I also notice what usually happens that you need to notice here is that your team will start to press because they also know that they don't usually score touchdowns. So they will usually go for it on fourth down, or they'll do some uncharacteristic things because they know they need to get into the end zone and they know they don't need to settle for field goals. I will say here, shout out to Chris Boswell. I believe the Steelers won 2 games this year by only kicking field goals. That is not necessarily something I'm proud of, but it does speak to the resilience of my team. Anyways, let me get to the other thing. The other thing I will say here that is a little frustrating is when your team consistently has 3 and outs. How I will say, to preface this, I don't expect every time a team has the ball on offense to not go 3 and out. That is not what I'm saying. But if you look up the amount of times your team goes 3 and out, as opposed to the amount of times another team goes 3 and out, you will start to realize that this is another random thing that you need to pay attention to. My Steelers, a lot of times, would go 3 and out this year. It was just something I got used to. Unfortunately, towards the end of the year, I started realizing Texas's football team was going 3 and out. We were having a drive, and it was like we would get a penalty, and then we'd start going backwards, and then we do something else, and then we do something else, and it was a 3 and out. And so I started to realize that trend or that pattern of my team this year. So something to think about is, does your team go 3 and out a lot? If they do go 3 and out a lot, take that as a mental note. Take that as another touch point where you can say, okay, one thing about my team, we're going to go 3 and out, right? Like that's one thing we're going to do. Because if you're going 3 and out a lot, I've said this before, you cannot control the clock. And if you cannot control the clock, it's going to be hard for you to win football games. So just saying, just throwing that out here, because this is where those things show up. You have to be able to stay on the field when you're on offense. Playing complementary football, staying on the field is very important. So if you start to notice that your team is going 3 and out a lot, and that is something that they do, take mental note of that, because that is not a great thing. Another thing I'll mention here that I have a lot of familiarity with, again, is not doing anything with turnovers. When you look at your team, look and see what they're doing with turnovers. I always say this. When I get a turnover, I at least want to score points off of the turnover. Do I want to score a touchdown over a field goal? Absolutely. But if all I can get out of that turnover is a field goal, I will take the field goal as opposed to not scoring any points. Sometimes with my teams, unfortunately this year, we would get a turnover and then we get a 3 and out, so it was all for nothing. The other thing to consider here also about when you get a turnover and you don't turn it into points, you basically were given another opportunity to score in that football game. And when you squander away that opportunity and when you do nothing with that, that is an issue. The one thing I'll say here is if you're in a game and it is in a defensive battle game and you get a turnover and you don't do anything with that turnover as far as scoring points, but you're able to flip the field position, that works. You know, if I had a list, I would say I want to score a touchdown, I want to score a field goal, and I want to flip field position. That is still a good thing when you can flip field position, but that is not the end all be all, because to win football games, you have to score points. So I'm just calling this out here, something to remember when you're watching your team. Does your team get turnovers? And when your team gets turnovers, what do they do with those turnovers? Because if you're getting turnovers, but you're doing nothing with those turnovers, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but it kind of, it kind of leaves you kind of hanging a little bit because nothing really comes of those turnovers. So just something to consider here. The last thing I'll say, and honestly, this is kind of one of my favorite things, is about leadership and team consistency. So this is one of those things where you just have to trust yourself a little bit. Now, just because somebody might seem like a great leader, I said team consistency. I meant team chemistry. Just because somebody might seem like a good leader off the field, or just because somebody might seem like a good whatever, when your team is on the green field or blue field, if you're at Boise State, when your team is on the field, what does the leadership look like? What does the team chemistry look like? The way that I look at team chemistry is this, and I don't know if anybody else sees it this way, but this is how I look at team chemistry during a game. If your quarterback gets sacked, is somebody going to help up your quarterback? What happens when somebody makes a bad play? Is somebody rushing over to kind of tap them and say, hey, we got this? Is somebody hitting them on the helmet? What does your team look like when things are going bad? When things are going bad, is your team still rallying around each other? Is your team still coming together? What does your coach's body language look like? Are your coaches leaning into what's going on? How does that leadership show up on the field? And how does that leadership show up in the players? What does that chemistry look like? You want to pay attention to the body language. You want to pay attention to people that look dejected. What do they look like on the sidelines? Are they still meeting on the sidelines? Or are they just going over to the sidelines and sitting by themselves? Are they still looking to talk to their receivers? What if your quarterback and your receiver aren't communicating well and nothing is working? How are they communicating with each other? Are they still coming together to communicate with each other? All of these different things, in my opinion, is team chemistry. What does it look like? How does it work when you're on the football field, not off the football field? On the football field, because collectively, this is where coaches have to come together. This is where the players have to continue to come together. And this is when the leadership really shows. Everybody can show up when everything's going well. We're not here for that, because more things are actually going to go wrong, usually, if you're having one of those games on a football field. So how does that team come together? What does that team chemistry look like on the field? Very, 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 very important, in my opinion. So let me give you a recap of all the things that I just talked about. The one thing I will continue to say in this series is you have to pay attention and be honest with your team. You have to be able to assess your team. You have to be able to assess your team's behavior, and then you have to be able to apply something to it. So I always in my head use a point system. Is my team chemistry good? Okay, no. Okay, negative points. Is my team chemistry good? Do I know that my guys are going to pick themselves up? Do I know that if we get a turnover, we at least will flip the field position, or we will at least, get points out of this? Or what do all of these things look like? All of these things are very important into assessing your football team because they're random. They're random things on a football field. Can you look up some of these things and look at the stats and see if all of these things show up on stats? Yes, you can, but you will have to do a little bit more digging. When you are assessing these things, it's going to be really hard for you just to look at the highlights. It's going to be really hard for you to just look at the box score. You're actually going to have to dig deeper to try to understand what is going on with your football team, to be able to assess your football team and figure out what you think and feel. The other thing I'll say before I end this video and go on to the next video is this is another way that you can assess other football teams and other competition that are going to play your football teams. You can figure out what that team does well or what that team doesn't do very well, and then you can compare your team against that team. That is why I will always say over and over and over, you have to assess your football team based on what you see other teams do, because those are the teams that you're going to play. So if those teams do really good with creating turnovers, scoring points off of turnovers, and all the things that I've talked about here, you might just need to pay attention to that when you're assessing if your team is going to win or lose. Just something to consider. This concludes my random video. We are going to wrap this up with a little bow on it, and we are going to move on, and we're going to talk about video 8, and that is going to be all the negatives. One thing I will say about negatives is football is a game of inches, and there's a lot of weird things that can happen. So anytime you have any of these negatives come up, you need to pay attention, and you need to just take notice of the things that your team usually does that end up being a negative. So I will end this video here. Let's hope that this video actually goes into the upload and actually gets released, because God forbid I have to record this video again. Anyways, if you haven't already, don't forget to comment in the comment section below. But I'm super excited for you to see the negatives, because the negatives are very important to assessing your football team and to figure out if you think your team is going to win or lose. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in my next video.